My name's Whangarei Slater, for those that don't know, and I'm chairing the meeting this evening. Now, we've got some other advisors on hand. I've been looking around the room and I've sent a lot of invites out to people, and we've got a wealth of experience that if we need to call on any of those experienced people, ex-councillors, etc., they are available, and I'm fairly confident that they'd be more than happy to speak if need be. So what I'd like to start off with an introduction. Larry Mitchell made us an offer to come north with his presentation to inform us as an independent of the current financial situation our district councils are taking us into. In some ways, Larry is possibly shooting himself in the kneecap. His client base for many years has been district and regional councils in New Zealand and overseas. In the past, Larry has been treated as a wealth of knowledge to many of these councils. Larry invited all 3 district councils in Northland, that's the Far North, Kaipara and Whangarei District Councils, to see his presentations, and to date, all have declined. Some councils don't want to hear what Larry has to say, but Larry believed the people of the district deserved to know the real facts in the winterless north. So he believed we needed to know, and that's why you're all invited along this evening. Now it's quite funny, Larry's not a common name. There's not a lot of Larrys. And when the invitation started going out, I got an email through, and I'd just like to read it to you because I thought it was funny. You mightn't think so. And as a new teacher was trying to make use of her psychology courses, and she started her class by saying, "Everyone who thinks they're stupid, stand up." After a few seconds, Larry stood up. The teacher says, "Do you think you're stupid, Larry?" And Larry says, "No, ma'am, but I hate to see you standing there all by yourself." There's a bit more to the story, because Larry's seen us standing up here in Northland experience some financial difficulties. He offered to come up to give us some sound facts to enable us to make the necessary changes we hope will guide us on a road to recovery. You can't make changes or improvements without firstly admitting you have a situation that needs addressing. Maybe we need to change the way we think, and there also may be need for a culture change in our councils. There's no point in burying your head in the sand in the hope it will go away. Just look what's happened recently in the Kaipara. And didn't they say the Titanic was unsinkable? Anyway, what I'd like to do is now introduce Larry. And Larry Mitchell, if you'd like to come forward. And then Larry's got a presentation which will take some 45-50 minutes. And then at the end of that, we'll have a question and answer time, and we'll have a mobile microphone, more than happy to pass it around. So, Larry Mitchell, welcome to Whangarei.
Thank you very much, Warren, and good evening and kia ora, everybody. It's great to see such a gathering here tonight. We had a very interesting meeting of ratepayers in Kaipara last night, not quite as many people, but the issues are pretty much the same right across New Zealand, and I hope for the sake of Whangarei ratepayers that you can go away tonight with a good appreciation of just what the financial circumstances and the economics to some degree of your wonderful district is and are. I will take about 45-50 minutes, and it's a PowerPoint presentation which goes by the name of the 10 biggies when I present it to councils. I'd like to just start perhaps with the first slide. That's where I live. It's at Puhoi, which is part of Northland. It's where the Totara begins. And so we think of ourselves as part of Northland, or I do. When I moved to Puhoi 17 years ago, I noted that the name of the road where I live at Carrie Glen Lodge revelled under the name of Fiddler's Hill, which wasn't a great address for a chartered accountant. So I now call myself a local government finance and policy analyst, brackets local government. Bit of a mouthful, but that describes what I've been doing now for at least the last 15 years, and I love every minute of it. I love it because of the people such as yourselves. That is, it's community based. Every district has got citizenry who are keen to see the district do well, and I include in that certainly the elected members who put their names forward. Unfortunately, the best of intentions, I feel in some cases, are thwarted by circumstances, thwarted by matters that arise within the administration of the council itself. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about that. I'd like to firstly start by pointing out briefly this article in today's Advocate. I don't know how many of you have read it. It's titled Masters of the Black Arts, and it's by Nikki Muir. It talks about governance, it talks about the position that CEOs, and in one case the Mayor, have got to, and I'm afraid to say that it's a pattern that's developed under the 2002 Local Government Act, where the CEO is given enormous powers. And you've seen what can happen in different councils around the country. Now, I don't have a downer on the CEOs, but I think what's reflected in that article, and I suggest you all read it, please, is because it hits the nail on the head in terms of the culture of, let's say, the internal management of a council versus the ratepayers. We're supposed to be on the same side, but I think in reading Nikki's article, you'll find that there are people these days who, with the benefit of the legislation that they're administering, perhaps lose the plot, or perhaps they've been in their jobs too long. Right, well, let's kick off and we'll try this machine. I'd certainly like to thank the people that have organised this, particularly Warren, his wife and others who've gone to a lot of trouble to organise this evening's meeting. What I'm producing is what I consider to be independent, contestable information. That is, I don't have any axe to grind. I look at the evidence, and apparently councils are either scared by the numbers or they have their own advisors. But Warren has correctly said that I'm finding it difficult getting any traction with the councils. So for the first time, I've decided A, to produce the league tables, which is a ranking of councils. Not the most popular move from council's point of view, because that's a measurement device, and secondly because the councils have determined that the stuff that I produce is not the sort of stuff that they want to know. So it's based on evidence, it's based on facts, and I don't want to get into any local issues, the squeaky wheel stuff. This is really a presentation that is designed to inform rather than to have any robust political debates they can follow. That's the local issues that can be followed after this meeting if need be. There's a lot of change in the wind for local government over the whole country, and I'll say a bit more about that shortly. There's also, obviously, if you read the newspapers, all sorts of ideas about what happens in the north. The Whangarei District Council, did they want to know what were the decisions made in terms of whether they wanted to take part in a presentation of this kind or not? They'll have the benefit of the PowerPoint on my website so they can look at the numbers if they want to. That's the PowerPoint from tonight's presentation. And I'd like to acknowledge Nikki Muir. I don't know whether Nikki's here tonight. She is? Yeah. It is extremely heartening to see an article like that. I realise that it's got some heat in it from the local situation, but it's actually right on the money in terms of the governance issues that are starting to show up. Now, I produce every year, and I have done for the last 15 years, a set of statistics and performance reports based on those statistics. I spend, while you're at the beach, I spend most of my December through to February pulling all the data out of the annual reports, the annual plans, and I put them into a product called Base Stats with Trends, and you'll see some of the graphs in tonight's presentation. They're the only set of performance statistics on local government in New Zealand, and I don't know whether any of you know of David Farrer. He was actually on Radio New Zealand today. He runs a website that's absolutely compulsory reading for people in Wellington at least, a blog site called Kiwi Blog. And I sent the statistics of the local government league table to David, and he was kind enough to comment on his blog that isn't it amazing that a website of a small firm like Larry Mitchell's can have more information on the performance criteria and the way in which councils are being managed, but particularly the performance reports on that website than any one of the councils around New Zealand have got. And I'm going to be talking a bit about the change of culture that might be necessary to get councils to recognise that they do business for ratepayers and that they should be reporting and showing their performance on an improvement basis. The Northern Advocate has been wonderful in terms of taking the league table, which is really where all this started, because we'll come to that soon. But one of the reporters who's since moved down south, unfortunately, Joseph Aldridge, wonderful chap who did his homework and produced a couple of reasonably good, very good items in the Advocate that started the ball rolling. So we've got the league table, which has been running now for 3 years, and you'll see some parts of it for the extracts for this presentation. And it's an attempt to rank the councils on some criteria which I'll describe. I want to cover some of the reforms that are in the wind and late-breaking news. I've spent 2 days in Wellington just recently talking to people who are very concerned about local government and how it fits into New Zealand Incorporated's attempt to get out of the recession, to improve our standard of living, to develop infrastructure, and central government are extremely concerned about local government at the moment. They've almost got to the point of having had enough. So I'm one of those glass half full guys. I think that now we will see some serious reform, and it will be, if I get an opportunity, I'll be happy to be part of it, because it's something that I've been writing about, talking about and acting upon for the last 15 years. Warren is going to give you the opportunity at the end of the session to have a discussion. We've got some questions that we will discuss. I've got to admit I've done a bit of homework on some of them. And what I don't want to do in red is to relitigate or even enter into the discussion on the rights and wrongs of the hunter bassa. I'm taking a position on anything that the Whangarei District Council does or plans to do based on can they do it from a prudent financial perspective. It's not the issue itself, it's really the underlying finances as to whether it's a good thing to do for you people to make up your own mind on. And I'd like to also take the opportunity now, because of the Advocate featuring the response to the results in the league table from the finance officer, who I know quite well at Whangarei, and amongst some of the misinformation that was a riposte to the results of the league table, and as far as I know the council hasn't read the league table. It's available on my website. The response was that, well, how can these figures in the league table be right when we've just received from the funding agency a credit rating from, I'm not sure whether it was Moody's or Standard & Poor's, a AA- credit rating. And I thought to myself, well, that sounds pretty good. AA, if it was, let's say, a private firm, or even if it was an individual, that AA would catch in the mind of Joe and Josephine Public, and that would probably come across as sounding like it's pretty good. So I did a bit of legwork and found that of the 10 councils that have gone into this new funding agency, Whangarei ranks 8 out of 10 with an AA-. You see, the difference between a private firm and a local government organisation is that councils have a taxing authority, and so their revenue is pretty much guaranteed, quite different from Fisher and Paykel, who have to chase the market and produce goods and do things, whereas councils have got the right to charge their citizenry. So that's one of the reasons why the bankers and the rating agencies bring up the rating to that AA level. But I wanted you to know that if that's a response to the findings from the league table, it's a very weak one. So to get to the presentation itself, the objectives are to conduct the review and a presentation of the Whangarei District Council's vital statistics in financial and economic terms, introduce just briefly a number of local government reform issues for wider debate, and then facilitate the discussion as to what next for Northland, Whangarei, and also perhaps some discussion on where the reforms are taking us. Right, let's get into it. Where did all this begin? Well, it began with the issuance, for the third time as I say, of the league tables. And Whangarei last year was 63rd out of the 73 councils. With the merger of the Auckland units into the Auckland Council, that number dropped to 67, so the relative position for Whangarei this year is about the same, 62nd, fifth from the bottom. A little surprising to me that it was that low, but I just do the numbers, and that's what came out of the methodology, which I'll describe briefly. The Northern Advocate on July the 27th had those headlines, and they didn't appear to be interested, apart from some rejoinders as to a AA- rating. They didn't appear to want to engage in a serious discussion about their finances. So this is it, folks. The council's response was, I guess, emu in the sand, some press coverage, but really quite a minimal response to the challenge that I guess the league table represents. Now, they certainly weren't alone in that. It's a very unpopular initiative, and as Warren has said, perhaps I've shot myself in the foot, but I think it's too important for ratepayers and people in New Zealand to just accept the stuff that's dished up by the council and say, well, that's gospel. Let's have some contestable independent advice, and let's see the evidence as to whether these councils are doing well or not, and hence the league table. We'll be concentrating on the debt and the financial position of the council. There is the concept of grouping, that is, the councils, because they all operate under the same legislation, are pretty much like with like, but they differ in terms of size, their character, and my base stats with Trends has 4 separate groups, metro down to rural, and the G9 group was one of the first groups that we used of comparable councils, and it's always included Whangarei. Whangarei, incidentally, for years took the stats that I produce, and so it's quite disappointing that lately the current management have decided to do without them, because they certainly track and show progress and performance improvement, or the reverse. So we've got the standard G9 group. I've also done some stats where I've grouped the 3 TLAs in the Northland area into a small group, and I'll make the distinction as we come to the graphs. The first one is debt per ratepayer. Now that's a graph that comes from the base stats with Trends, and it's a very good graph because it reduces as a denominator the numbers of ratepayers. So it's really saying whatever your population size, this is the debt on a per ratepayer basis. And after all, ratepayers are the people that pay the interest and other bills. There was a time when the maximum prudent level, this was back in the late 90s, for debt within any New Zealand council was about $1,500. You can see that in this year, 2007, the debt was a little bit over 3,000. In fact, that grouping there is the Northland group of the 3 TLAs, Kaipara, Far North and Whangarei, and Whangarei in 2007 had the highest debt per ratepayer. That purple line is the group average, and the dotted line is the sector average for all 67 or 73 councils. You can see that it's inexorably rising, as is the group, of course, and the Kaipara position at that point would have influenced that. It'll be off the scale next year when they book all of the debts for all of the councils. Incidentally, these are the 2011 audited figures. That's June 2011. And it'll be 2 or 3 months before we get the annual reports and the financial accounts from the councils for the 2012 period. So Whangarei has been sitting at the highest out of the group for most of those years. It slipped down to second, midpoint, largely because of the aberration of Kaipara. Interesting too that the long-term plan that's just been, that's the 10-year plan to 2022, has forecast a flat debt at about the same level per ratepayer for the whole period. So that in 10 years' time, with 45,000 people on their population estimates, which they've said I think is about 500 new ratepayers a year, they'll reach 200 million of debt, which is still roughly the same figure as we've got now, 4,500 as opposed to 4,444. Any questions on that? What I should say is that my estimates of debt are kosher. That is, I take term liabilities and I add to that current liabilities, largely because councils, with their debt figures, operate a smoke and mirrors policy. With internal borrowing and so on, it's very difficult even for an analyst to determine what their true debt is. So I say, well, pardon my French, bugger that. We'll make it the same for everybody and just add all the liabilities on a conceptual framework basis. That's what the Accountant Society would do. It's not any of the Mickey Mouse accounting that many of the councils have got themselves tied up in, which one would have to suspect is there for a purpose, that debt is a sensitive issue, and anything they can do to minimise the apparent level of debt they will do. And so this is at least it's the same for every council on a like with like basis, but the figures that I come up with are generally higher than councils systematically. Now, what's happened to the results, that is the profit and loss, if you like, we call it deficit or surplus, over the last 5 years for Whangarei, and for, in this case again, the 3 Northland councils. Well, you can see that the council, this council has gone from surpluses, that's above this line, there's the line there, the 0 line. They had surpluses in those 2 years, but now small deficits, or actually small surplus I think, and a deficit there. And their deficit is accumulating small deficits over the last 3 years, but variable data, so I have a data caution on that. They also, and we'll come to this again, they're the second lowest within their G9 group of a thing called ratepayer equity per ratepayer. Now that sounds very pointy-headed accounting, but what it's really saying is if you're a householder and you've got an asset, your house, of $400,000, and you've got a loan of $200,000, then your equity in that house is $200,000, correct? Well, on this same basis, the ratepayer's equity that you as a ratepayer really are the owners of, with the balance sheet equation, that is assets less liabilities, you have got, in the G9, you've got a very low ratepayer equity, 8th out of 9 for the G9 group. So coupled with the deficits and coupled with that very low ratepayer equity, Whangarei is not well placed right off the bat in terms of finances compared to the others, or compared to anything for that matter. Right, well this is the ratepayer equity figures, and I'm sorry if you can't see them up the back, but I'll read them if I can. This is the 2011 figure. There's 34,000 for Whangarei, 42,000 for the far north, and 30,000 for Kaipara. So that is the number of ratepayers divided into the net worth of the council. You see what I mean? So if these were individuals, then obviously the best place is the far north because they've got a bit more equity, either less debt or higher valued assets. And of course Kaipara, their figure when it comes around to June of 2012 will be lower than that. The interesting thing here is because this is measuring the financial, I'd say, robustness or the strength of the council's financial position. Now, what about over the rest of the country? Well, the average for the Northland group is 36,000. Okay? The average over the whole country is 48,000. So the Whangarei District Council is sitting in the midpoint for the group of the Northland councils, but it's sitting a long way below the New Zealand average. I think we've got some more data on that on another slide. I couldn't resist putting this up because it's just appeared on the Stats New Zealand website, and it's the New Zealand sector. That is all 60, no, in fact it includes the regionals as well, so it's about 75 councils around the country, and the deficits that they've been running, that's the annual result, like a profit or a loss. And the disturbing thing here is that the operating surplus deficit, where that's the zero line, has gone from the small surpluses in those 2 years, the same years that we're looking at before roughly, to accumulating large deficits. And I know this is concerning people in Wellington, because at a time when they are trying to engineer some infrastructure development to get the economy going again, this is not helping because councils are up against their debt ceilings. It would appear from this stat, this particular graph, that they are using whatever reserves they've got just to keep the show going. Of course, they've got the benefit of being able to put the rates up to whatever level they feel can be tolerated, and I think we've got some more of that to come. But what the ratepayers will say about that, they'd be marching with pitchforks down the main street if they want to get back to a position that's, let's say, break even. Legally, incidentally, they should be within a bull's roar of that zero line on a balanced budget basis. What's interesting here is that this is a true result to the extent that that particular calculation leaves out some accounting sophistry, which often brings in surpluses from vested assets, from revaluations of assets. Those are really just book entries. This stuff is the real cash deficit in this case. Now, what it means for next year and for the future for all of the local government sector is something of grave concern. And I don't overstate my case there, because I know just how concerned particularly the people in Wellington are. When they can't get out of local government the infrastructure development that they were hoping for, they say, what the hell's going on? Now, this is a bit advertorial, and I won't go into it too much, except to say that the base stats with trends has got a mini GDP in it. That is, there are 30 measures within the reports that you might be interested in, because this tracks over 5 years just how well the mini economy of every one of these district councils around the country is doing. And all I can say there is that the mini GDP, that's the share of the nation's GDP that resides here in Northland, then Whangarei, not surprisingly for an urban authority, has got the best stats, but it's lowest amongst the small city group of the true G9 peers. So that just reflects some of the stats we'll be looking at shortly, which are a question of the demographics and the income earning capacity of the district. This is also neither here nor there, in that it's really just a size ranking. It's information only. Whangarei is second in size. It's quite a large part of that group of 9 amongst its true peers. And you can have a look on the website at that graph a bit further if you like. It's just got a measure of some sizes. Here's one that usually gets them exercised. There are a number of benchmarks in the reports. This is one that I thought you might be interested in. It's the CEO's package related to total revenue. There's about 5 or 6 measures relating the CEO's emolument, remuneration package, to the total revenue ratio. I was a bit naughty when I put that stuff together. I thought, well, once again, that word again, bugger it. Let's see what it shows from council to council. So sometimes when I sell my reports, they stay in the CEO's bottom drawer, possibly because it's got something to do with these sort of ratios. In this case, just for the group of 3 in Northland, the CEO's package based on a measure of total revenue is the first out of 3rd, neither here nor there, but second out of 9 amongst the other peers around the country. Quickly moving on. This is one where I have a data issue. You realise we haven't had a census for 7 years, but it'll be 8 years before we get new data on a lot of this stuff, and unfortunately it affects the data that I've got to work with in terms of district incomes. However, that aside, this shows the proportion of fixed income earners, that's the beneficiaries, people on unemployment benefit, superannuitants, a whole collection of people who are basically on fixed incomes as a proportion of the population. And in this case, this is the lowest most favourable of these income measures compared to the other Northland councils, and interestingly enough it's about midpoint amongst the larger group, but as I say, a big question mark over the income related data. Now here is a summary of the results from the league table, and it's a bit out of place here, but I'll try and describe what it's talking about. It's looking at New Zealand councils, all of the councils, their sustainability measures. I'll come back to that in a minute. But the interesting thing is, based on the 5 measures of sustainability within the league table, these are league table results, and there's that ratepayers equity per ratepayer again, and you can see there's that 45,000 average, 48,000 in 2012 compared to your 36, was it? 34 or something. But in each case, the movement on these sustainability measures between the 2 years has got either better or worse. So we've got challenging, obviously recession-influenced economics around the country, and that's reflecting in the league table results for sustainability. The next one affects the same council group, all of them, and it's affordability that's measured here. Here we've got a slightly different mix. There's some better, there's some that are square or even. The recession stubbornly persists, and the census data on income applies. So between the 2 years we didn't see any startling improvements. In fact, if anything, we saw a further slide from good to less good or worse. Now I just want to talk briefly about the league table. The league table was devised 3 years ago, largely on the basis of saying, all right, what can we look at within public information about councils? What could we look at by way of public information that we could put into, let's say, a league table that would be meaningful to the ratepayers? So we devised some measures. There are 10 metrics, and there are some other factors. Remember those points? There are 10 metrics. On sustainability there are 5. Affordability there are 5, and there are a range of other factors, and all of those as an amalgam gets you to the point where you can rank a council based on financial sustainability. Now that is sustainability from a financial perspective of the council itself. Excuse me. Affordability is the other metric, 5 measures for that, and that's the affordability of the community. That's the demographics, that is the ability to pay for council services. So within those 10 metrics you've got, is the council sustainable in prudent financial terms, and are the services that the council are delivering to the population, the residents and ratepayers, excuse me again, are they affordable? And in addition to that, what other things, other factors might influence a ranking? Like how about an earthquake? Or how about leaky buildings? And there's another monster that's coming, and that is earthquake rectification. That's the strengthening of buildings. So when you look at all of those things across the sector, we come up with a ranking of from 1 to 67 this year. And it's interesting that the Presbyterians down in the deep south, the Clutha and the central Otago people who've got no debt or low debt, are ranked 1st and 2nd this year, and last year they were 2nd and 1st. So that shows that the table itself is quite robust, and given the importance in the sustainability data of debt, it's hardly surprising that the high debt councils are those at the bottom, coupled with the fact that if their income stats and their affordability stats are not flash either, that's how you get Whangarei to 62 out of 67. In the case of, let's say, Central Otago, I guess they're making a few bucks down there as well on an income basis, but they certainly haven't got any of the major debt problems. So I think there's a lesson in that for North Island councils. Now I'll quickly just look at where we go on Whangarei. They had, their audit opinion was delivered on time and unqualified. They've got poor commercial assets, that is, they don't actually own many commercial assets. They've got poor financial assets, in fact very poor. They've got a good investment property, but they've got relatively high debt. That's probably a sort of a yes and no a bit. But they've got very low financial assets, and I'll come back to that. These are just numbers, and notice that they've gone from a green traffic light to a downgrade this year. That was last year's traffic light position. Notice that Kaipara went from yellow to double red. We had to introduce a double red this year, and that's a single red. So that is a downgrade, but not, of course, to the extent to the extent that it's a double red. Those measures have been omitted from this part of the table, and notice that this is the other factors. I'm doing it sort of backwards at the moment, but those are the other factors that relate to the group here. You can see these, like I mean, for example, Kaipara was always going to be marked down because they've only just filed their annual report, and the audit opinion wasn't available when we did the, none of that accounting information was available, nor was it audited at the time that we did the league table. Whangarei, largely because of the yellow to, sorry, the green to red has got a weaker 2011 position, and recall the fact that, you know, that's still one of those key factors in terms of the strength or weakness of the council. The ratepayer equity per ratepayer for the Whangarei District Council is quite a low 34,000. Here's the actual table itself, and I've got copies of the full document here if you want to have a look at it afterwards. So here's this group of 3 Northland councils again. There's the Northland average. They're just numbers. I can go into those if you like. Here are some of the comments about it. There's the repeat of the other factors going from the green to red. And overall, the final assessment was poor. Whangarei has gone from 63rd last year down to 62. And these are the metrics that are scored. And the other factors obviously have been quite influential in that downgrade, or at least retaining that position around about 62nd out of 67. Now this you might find interesting. It's one of the few reasonably reliable rates surveys that are conducted annually. The Napier City Council very generously do a questionnaire of the councils that form that group there. And here, we couldn't do this at Kaipara last night, but here Whangarei is one of the G9. This was the original G9 almost. And their results over for average residential rates, it doesn't say anything about commercial industrial rates, but their numbers for Whangarei are almost on the average after, 6 years of 17, can you see that, 1767, as opposed to the average of, can you see that, 1728, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or was that 1328?
17.
Oh, thank you, that's a relief. Which indicates a 21% increase over that 5-year period, a 22% increase for Whangarei for just residential rates over that period. So at least it gives you a peg in the ground as to whether, on this basis, and it's a very slim basis, whether Whangarei's rates are high, low or median in terms of its peers. So in this case, as of when these results came out, there'll be some more information that we'll add to that stack in 2012, so we'll see what the situation is vis-a-vis its peers in terms of average residential rates. Not too many more to go, so I'll gallop through these. Where to for Whangarei and Northland? Well, I would say this because it's been my business and still remains my business, that is council performance improvement. We should be seeing councils involved in some form of performance improvement program, but we're not. I don't know any of you that have been in the private sector, you'd be aware of the Baldridge Award or the ISO 9000 or any one of a number of different schemes that says, right, we are here, we want to be here. How do we get there? Well, we embark upon a performance improvement program. Now, some people would say that's not the way to go, but as a default position, it's not a bad thing to do. When I last looked, a mini survey I did about 2 years ago, there were only 12 councils in New Zealand that had anything that looked like a performance improvement program. And I say why? They should all be on some form of performance improvement program that is measured, set goals at every level, from the custodian of of the gym right through to the CEO. And of course you can apply that to the performance of elected members too if you wish. There should also be some performance measurement worthy of the name. We're getting PR statements now from councils. There's very little that as an analyst I can get my teeth into, and unfortunately my council, the Auckland Council, is one of the worst. It's all just PRBS, lots of initials, but it doesn't actually tell. If an analyst can't get a handle on whether a council has improved, gone sideways or gone south, then what chance does average Joe and Josephine ratepayer have? What about a public awareness? What about a public performance and awareness survey? They conduct surveys, but often they're not all that independent. What we should be seeing is at least some questions asked, the hard questions, as to whether you think the council has improved on a range of criteria, and that should be part of an overall comprehensive performance improvement program. This word affordability, thank goodness, is starting to come into the vernacular of long-term plans. But when you look at the long-term plans that have just been issued, they haven't tried to level the increases, that is, of rates, of debt and costs. They're still the same upward sloping graphs. So the message hasn't got through that people are hurting out there, that affordability is an issue, that median incomes are not progressing at the same rate as council's costs, and they're continuing to plan for a sloping upward to the right set of curves when, I'll give you an example, of one council back in, it was a client of mine, I'm proud to say, the Hutt Council back in 1998 decided to embark on a performance improvement program. They were getting hell in the local media because their rates were going up. And so they said there was a determined team of the mayor, the CEO and a couple of management people, including a very fine finance guy who's now the CEO. They said, right, enough's enough. We'll make do with our old council building. We'll start to cut our cloth. We'll stick to the knitting. And you know what? Within 6 years or 7 years, they won the New Zealand Business Excellence Gold Award. They were the top organisation in the country against all comers, including private sector companies, Fletcher Challenge and Fisher and Paykel included. So it can be done. Now, why is it not happening in practically every council around the country? We're getting the reverse. Take a drive over to Dargaville and talk to a few people over there. So in terms of affordability, we've got to see improved cost effectiveness. That is the conversation when long-term plans are being devised has got to include, can we afford it? How often do you hear that? It's more a matter of let's just do the same old and let's see what sort of castle we can build this particular 3-year term. This is a favourite of mine. I'm a recovering auditor. I spent 3 years on secondment with the OAG, and I got very interested in local government audit and accounting at that stage, around about 1993, 94. It seems a long time ago now, but I never forgot the lessons about how an active and passionate bunch of auditors could try and do their best to see that, particularly councils in that case, stayed on the rails. And I spent most of my 3 years involved in an investigation into the cost overruns of the Aotea Centre, you might remember that. And I earned the spurs on that, and we could almost say that at least for the next 10 years, councils didn't dare overrun their costs or create those monsters like the Aotea Centre, largely because of that report. What we've got now amongst the audit fraternity, and they've got egg all over their face in Kaipara, is that they're not active enough. They pick up their annual audit fee and take the money and run. And I haven't really seen any projects, hard-hitting forensic projects or even value for money projects coming out of the local government cell in Wellington for a long, long time. And so some of the discussions I'm having in Wellington at the moment are precisely along those lines. At the time that we were discussing about where should councils go in terms of reform, and you're welcome to get a copy of it off my website, is a paper that I've just done on issues, tactical issues, points on the board issues that could be immediately implemented, because you'd be aware that local government reform is happening. This is one man's view of things that could happen now. No need for changes of legislation. We could do it within the context of how we operate councils at the moment. And there's some of these elephants in the room that have been there for a long time. I'll give you an example of one of them. There's 8 of them. I could have got maybe 18. How about this one? How long ago, or no, when was it, if ever, you last saw a percentage rate increase announced that 12 months later a council reported as actual? Because that's just budget, isn't it? How do we know that the percentage rates increases that they're announcing are in fact correct? Is there not an incentive for councils to understate the percentage rates increases, particularly when there's an election around the corner? Now, am I just being unduly suspicious? I don't think so, but at the moment this is one area of major public interest that has no audit coverage. And here we are, we sit meekly by, and the media do their best, but they don't do a great deal other than report what the council has said the rates increase is going to be. Here's another one, and I said I'd say something a little bit about it. It gets a bit techo. This one here, anyone that's being charged, let's say, a targeted rate for their water or wastewater, within that charge on an annual basis, there will be an amount calculated that you pay as a ratepayer that pays for and supposedly puts aside a reserve for the replacement of those assets. And that's carefully calculated through an asset management plan, and they look forward to where the asset needs replacement or major maintenance. So you're paying for it as it goes, which is fair enough. But hello, what's happened to the funds? And I was talking to Bill Harris just before the meeting. In the old days, they used to put that money aside in things called sinking funds, which was considered by the white boys, the treasury management gurus, to not be such a flash idea. And they had some reasonable grounds for saying that it doesn't make any sense in accumulating large amounts of cash. But what's happened here, and this is a major concern to the people in Wellington that are looking now for the money that you and I have put aside into reserves, it hasn't been invested in sinking funds. It might be sitting there in the balance sheet apparently as an asset replacement reserve, but there's no funds on the other side of the balance sheet to back it up. That money has been raided right across the whole sector. This idea of treasury management, we'll have the money when we need it, is a lot of horse manure, because the money has been spent. Many of the councils are up to what are reasonably up to the level of the maximum prudent debt. And I could go on at some length about this, but it's a major concern that your money is being taken, supposedly reserved, but not invested and used for all sorts of stuff. Dare I suggest it might even get used for an art gallery. Probably shouldn't have said that. So, the rationale for the paper was that central government, and this is a bit advertorial, but the central government might wish, independent of the usual process and sectional interest, because what happens is that the usual suspects, what I call the cosy club, get together and say, well look, if there's some reforms coming down the track, we're going to white ant them. Doesn't that happen? That is, it's in the interests of some of the people that represent the bureaucrats in local government, and other government for that matter, to say, oh no, we can't have that. So the paper was an attempt to say, well, here's some things that you can galvanise the reform process, kick-start it, with some early points on the board, and those 4 of the ones of the 8 that I showed you are just a case in point. They're high return solutions, they're low-hanging fruit really, because they can all happen. Another one is some payroll controls. Everybody wants to know how many employees and what the payroll of a council is, but do you ever actually see any facts on it? Is there any way that the ratepayer can say that that's a reasonable number of employees or a reasonable payroll? Because the auditors don't go near it, and yet it's after depreciation, it is the second major recurrent operating item of expenditure in council accounts. So there are lots of things that can be fixed. Depreciation is another one, but that's a real tar baby, and some of that is more confusing even for me than I care to admit. So this time, are the reforms really underway? Well, I sincerely hope so. If you haven't had an opportunity to read the report of the review team at Kuiper, I suggest you do. If you're genuinely interested in local government affairs, or if you're thinking of standing next year as an elected member, please read that. It is a brilliant report, and the people that wrote it deserve the highest commendation. They were the minister's men, but without fear or favour, they really hooked into it. And the stuff that they've written there, plus that sort of stuff, is going to pay off, I assure you. If the people in Wellington are as serious as I think they are, we're going to see some changes in local government, and God thank the Lord for that, because it needs to be done. Most of us now have been battling against councils for a long time. Now that doesn't mean that overnight there's going to be a conversion on the road to Damascus. It's going to take some time. That audit activism thing is going to take 5 years to come through. But without audit activism, we can't expect our councils unless they're very well led. There are some exceptions. David Hall at South Waikato, Tony Stellinger at Hutt. These are people that have that responsibility to improve their organisations, and they get busy and do it. But that's 2 out of about 80 that actually get busy and do the sort of stuff that only the auditor with an arm up the back can often ensure happens. And they have been out to lunch for quite a while. It's about time they earned their fees. That's it. I hope that stunned look is not one of complete bemusement, and I'll hand over now to Warren to fire a few questions. Thank you.
Larry, thank you for coming along tonight. I know when I was in council we relied on your reports considerably, and they were the most independent feedback that we ever got. My concern is the role of Audit New Zealand. You seem to have indicated that they're not doing as well as they might. And for me, they absolutely fail. And in trying to deal with them about issues, they're wiping us out, or not bothering, or saying, you know, the annual report's out, or the LTP's done, so we're not going to get involved. Do you think Wellington is going to take Audit New Zealand to a better level of addressing what they should be addressing under the Local Government Act? So it's more than just the financial, but the whole purpose of the Act, which I believe councils and staff have become comfortable with and are not really performing.
What a great question. Thank you very much for that, because the 2002 Act has shot through with performance measurement criteria and decision-making criteria that, unless that's followed, then we come to circumstances a bit like we're seeing around the country now, of a disconnect between council decision-making and the community people who are supposed to be bottom-up and providing the input. Now, I know there's a lot of talk about over-consulting, and there's some truth in that, but what's happened is that without these performance measures that are in the Act being adhered to, and with audit not seeing that they are adhered to, anything seems to go. Now, I mean, I'm perhaps, and just thinking on what I've said over the last 3/4 of an hour or so, perhaps I'm extending the analogies a bit far, and I don't mean to generalise unnecessarily, but on this audit one, we have had auditors turning up for years now, ticking boxes. They have seemed to have forgotten that they have a social responsibility to make judgments. They do collect a lot of money from the ratepayers. In fact, even a little old Kuiper, they get a bill for 6 figures when there's an LTP to be audited. And I've challenged them through my contacts in Wellington to do a survey, another survey, of client and customer and ratepayer satisfaction. Won't that be interesting? One, whether they will do it, and secondly, whether they'll make public the findings. So I will do what I can to see that that sort of level of accountability is introduced, because there is widespread dissatisfaction with the quality of the audit that we've been getting in local government. And that's now resonating in the circles of central government in Wellington, I can assure you. So that's about as much as I should probably say. But there was a time when we had an active OAG. When was the last time you saw a report that was hard-hitting about a real matter of public interest from the Audit Office? It's a long time since they produced a report, or even a management letter to a council that tells it like it is. I think with the people that are visiting the OAG this week and next week, that we might see some action coming out of that, out of that office. The final thing I'll say is, in some cases, once again, I don't want to generalise too widely, but their ratepayer complaints process is risible. You might as well not bother. You get a formal response. And look what's happened in Kaipara, where for 3 or 4 years, people who were qualified, let's say in one case in local government law, were dishing up all the chapter and verse for the auditors to take cognizance of, to investigate properly. All they got back for 3 years was just form letters saying, no, she'll be right, we've got it under control. So they need a real shake-up, and they need some leadership that's got a bit of fire in their belly. After all, they are the ratepayers' watchdogs. Not as a poodle, more as a Rottweiler, or at least a little bit of mongrel, because they have become part of the problem, they're part of the cosy club. And the best thing they can do is to get out of Lambton Quay drinking lattes and get round the traps and actually do some gutsy auditing.
Thank you, that's it.
Pretty good comments there, Larry. Just something that come up, you mentioned before on the slide number 20 about the performance surveys. I know 2 years ago they did one in the Whangarei District Council, and one of the questions was the degree of, or percentage of satisfaction of the attendee or the performance at council meetings. Now I know there's 5 people, and I'm one of them, that normally attend council meetings, and they had a 89% performance was indicated. Attendance. Well, it was 80%. It was final figure was something like 89%. And the 5 of us that attend, and we've got a gentleman down the back who's a regular attendee, not one of us was phoned. So I don't know how they got those figures. Might have been the silent majority. Who knows? But anyway, we've got some more questions, please. One down the back there, thank you.
Yeah, the current government is following sort of free market policies, and there's a lot of discomfort with them after the global economic collapse. If we don't follow free market policies, where do you think we would go as an alternative?
Well, we could elect a Labor government, I guess. You know, I think that most Kiwis are a bit of everything. There you are. That is, we might have a few ACT supporters and we might have some real deep green supporters. But by and large, we elect governments that represent the middle of the bell curve. So we don't have the extremes. And I don't believe at the moment that we've got an extreme anything. That is, I don't think the National Party is extreme in terms of free market. Now, you might argue about asset sales and things of that kind. Well, we were warned and they were elected. That's perhaps covers that. But I live in Puhoi and I call myself a pastel green because you can't help but love the trees and the birds, even if you come from a pinstripe background in Queen Street. So I'm not trying to avoid the question, but try living in Syria at the moment. Try living in parts of the Eastern Bloc. Try living also in the southern states of the US. You know, we have a pretty much a middle-of-the-road government, and it's reflected best, I think, in local government. We don't have any politics. Are you running now? I just wonder whether you're deserting the ship. Somebody trying to get in. I mean, that's the sort of question that I don't, as an analyst, have any particular valid point of view on, because I'm just another Kiwi New Zealander. So I hope I haven't avoided the question. All right. Oh, and thank you for letting that gentleman in.
Good evening, Larry. I'm Merv Williams. I'm a district councillor.
How do you do, Merv?
I don't disagree with a lot of the results that you come up with, but I disagree with some of the methodology in getting there. And my main problem in that is in that the information we're presented with, I think is totally distorted. And we talk about audit. Audit New Zealand their program is to audit the accounts in terms of IFRS, International Financial Reporting Standards.
A bit wider than that.
Well, that's basically what they come along at, and that's what they say their job is.
Excuse me, Merv, but they have a wider mandate than just IFRS, which means they have to take cognizance of cost-effective, or the opposite, expenditures of public money.
Yeah, but it's amazing how they get sidetracked.
Yes.
And that IFRS becomes the be-all and end-all.
Yep.
And these financial reporting standards were brought out around Enron and the rot of Enron in the States. And they are absolutely meaningless to us, and therefore the information that we get presented in our annual reports a lot of the time is meaningless, because we really can't understand what is there. So for us, that is a real problem, both as a ratepayer and as councillors, to try to get interpretation as to what is going on. I'd like you, if you can, to give us some advice how we can get some better information.
Yep.
And I'd just like to say to people that, you know, we rely on good information, and then the type of information that should be put out is the sort of stuff that Mr. Harris wrote in the paper a couple of weeks ago there, where he didn't just look at the amount of reported debt. He looked at the total funds employed, and so that we sell properties and you add that on to what your reported debt is, you get total funds employed. So rather than talking 160 mil, we're talking 200 mil very quickly.
Merv, thank you for that question. The first part of it is, what are we getting with public annual reports, that is the audited reports that are legally required from councils, and we're getting accounting juju. We're getting a wodge of paper about that thick. And for those of you that are probably wondering what IFRS stands for, they're the International Financial Reporting Standards. And I was part of an unsuccessful battle in the mid-90s to get public sector accounting recognised as a separate discipline. And I think there may be some of this coming back. I mean, we've been hearing about simple, more direct use of language and of accounting numbers within public reporting, and it's being worked on at the moment. Now, I don't know, I'm not part of that project, but I couldn't agree with you more that we're getting reports that might mean something to analysts, and I struggle, got to be honest. That is part of the reason why audit are bedevilled by the fact that they've got huge checklists just complying with arcane accounting standards that don't actually meet the requirements of ratepayers who just want to know the answers to simple questions. I'll give you one quick example. If a council accepts that, and if we say that a council's beholden duty is primarily to maintain its infrastructure, you can't go to a set of annual reports or performance reports of any kind in this country for councils that tell you the answer to one or two simple questions. And the questions are these: how much did we provide this year for asset replacement? Next question: did that add to or reduce any backlog of infrastructure deficit? That is, are we keeping up with the funding requirements? And the third little question is, what was that amount? Now, for such a fundamental question, if we are racing around, or if the auditors and the accountants are racing around, filling out schedules I mean, the Treasury notes run to about a dozen pages about counterparty arrangements with any of their borrowing and hedging arrangements. Who gives a flying what have you, to be honest? If we don't know the answers to those most fundamental questions, then we've seriously lost the plot. So I sympathise with councillors who figure that those accounts are not giving them the information, because sure as hell the ratepayers are completely bloody befuddled too. But I would say for the elected members, they have a responsibility to get from management intelligent monthly information. And if they're not getting it, they should be asking why. I'm not saying that you're not, but they're quite different things. That is, the reporting for external purposes at the moment is a tar baby, because it's all tied up with the accountant's way of seeing things and international standards. But if we want to have good accountability within the councils, then the councillors should be insisting on reports that they can understand, preferably just on one page. And I've seen it done. And I've seen it stuck up on the canteen notice board at South Waikato, so that everybody knows just how the debtors over time are going, as to whether they're hitting budget for their deficit and what their expenditures are. And people look forward to seeing that one piece of paper every month, because they have set their budget, people understand what the budget is, they seem to be marching in step, and they've got information that's useful.
Thanks. My name is Alan Martin, and in past life I was a town clerk and municipal treasurer in the good old days in the 1970s, when we acted under the Municipal Corporations Act. In those days we didn't worry about depreciation, we did cash accounting. People understood it. You did your budget on what was coming in over the next year, what you're spending it on, including the sinking funds, which were invested in government stock, the Whangarei stock. Yep. 5% was the sort of normal return. Yep. And when you wanted a new bulldozer, you had the money there, hopefully, to replace it. I think a lot of the problem, and Merv's already mentioned Enron, I think a lot of it is the emperor's new clothes. People are too frightened to put up their hands and say, I don't understand it. And I agree completely, this idea of this one-page thing doesn't only apply to councils. It happens with a lot of clubs and societies. Simple cash accounting, so people know how much cash they've got and what they owe. And the idea, I agree with you completely, that instead of talking about depreciation, we should talk about asset replacement, which is separately funded. Right. So I agree with you completely.
Right. Yep. No, very well said. I think you've said it all, and a lot of it comes back to that principle requirement for councils to keep their infrastructure intact, and that is, just as you've said, to keep track of the funds that are there for the purpose of maintaining their service potential. And depreciation, in an accounting context, in my humble opinion, doesn't have any place in local government accounting. Loss of service potential does, which is what you're actually wasting in terms of an asset that you want to bring back up to a steady state.
Can I just give you one quick? Well, on depreciation, I came up here in 1983 on a temporary assignment from Auckland to do a special audit of the Harbour Board. And it took me quite some time doing the audit of the Harbour Board accounts, is how you depreciated dredging. So when you dug a hole in the ground, that's an asset, but when you maintained it, that wasn't. But while you were maintaining your hole in the ground, you dumped it on the side of the road and you built further land, and that became assets. And it was the most interesting sort of accounting concept in this arcane area of local authority accounting.
We've got a gentleman over here, which is Mr. Bill Harris. And Bill, you haven't spoken to you about this, but you know, you were actually 50-something years with the council. Bill's been pretty proactive lately, writing some interesting articles in the newspaper, which has got some hostile replies from people in council. But I mean, after 50 years working there, they must have accepted him for 50 years, and after a year or two of being away, they don't accept him. So what's wrong? Bill, would you like to say a few words this evening? I think it would be quite beneficial.
I can't sum it up. A few people are ready to go home, but if you want to give me 5 minutes, I'm happy to.
You're more than happy.
I'll go up there. I can look everyone in the eye then. I'm not a public speaker, I'm a letter writer. It's all been mentioned tonight, and Larry mentioned the internal borrowing. And that's my beef with council, is that they're not being true, in my view, about our level of debt. And I got a copy of the plan, and there was a thing on internal borrowing. Internal borrowing, you know what it is now. You've got some money over here for your holiday account. You can't pay your power account this week, so we'll just borrow some from the holiday fund. Next month you can't pay insurance, so we'll borrow from the holiday fund. You run your holiday fund down, there's nothing left. Now, council is allowed legally to borrow internally as well. And their policy is to be, as I understand it, it has to be paid back within 7 years. So it's debt. So I got the annual plan and they talked about this internal borrowing, but I couldn't find any numbers. So I rang up one of my friendly councillors who's in the room tonight, and I says, why can't I find any numbers? And he says, management says that the audit department won't let us disclose the internal borrowing. That's strange. So I rang up management in the council, and their words to me were this: yes, that's Bill. Audit insists that internal borrowing is not to be disclosed in the annual plan. I actually found out later that statement is true, but it's not truthful. Does that make sense? Double Dutch, how can I, let me think if I can explain that. You want to buy a car. So you go to a car yard, and there's this nice car there, and it's got a sign on it that says, buy this car and we guarantee you will never ever have any problem with the engine. So you go to take it for a test drive and it won't start. You lift the bonnet up and it hasn't got an engine in it. The statement is true. The statement is true, but it's misleading, it's underhand, it's sneaky, it's devious, it's all those things, and that's how council is giving you the information about the total level of debt. I'll now refer to it as engine sign information. And it's morally wrong. So I've worked with auditors over a long period of time, so I got in touch with the Auditor General's office, and he said, yes, that's correct, Bill, but it only refers to the debt line in the balance sheet in the financial accounts. That's the only time that, and what that means, and I think it's a technical accounting situation, council's got $30 million on this side of the edge of they're going to lend. Council's got $30 million, it's actually 40 I think, where no one knows. $30 million that they're going to borrow, one cancels the other out, so there's no need to put it in the accounts. But, and that's why I wrote the advocate, and by pure coincidence I have a copy in my pocket. Not that I take this to bed with me at night either. This is also what the audit department had to say. Apart from what can be included within the debt line of the balance sheet, the auditors will not be placing any limitation on disclosures, and in fact, we generally encourage more rather than less for transparency purposes. The use of reserves could usefully be disclosed to provide the readers of the long-term plan a full picture of the situation. Overall, we would encourage disclosure of external and internal debt in as clear a manner as possible. This is from the Auditor General's Office and local government. There are grounds to make clear disclosures outside of the financial statements in respect to the forecast amount of debt, internal and external. The current disclosures could be improved. Now, I put in a written submission, I put in an oral submission, told the council all this, and just to safeguard it, because I wasn't sure how I was going, I'm new to submissions, I haven't done it before, I went home and wrote an email to the mayor, because he wasn't at the meeting, my ward councillors, and one or two of my selected councillor friends, and I thought, right, I've got a majority here, there's going to be some real changes. What I wanted in the plan is a complete statement of debt. Yeah. In other words, here's your opening balance at 1st of July, internal or external, internal. Here's how much we're going to borrow, external, internal. Here's how much we're going to repay, external, internal. Here's the closing balance of the 10-year plan. Real simple stuff. So the final plan came out and it wasn't there. And that's why I got my knickers in a twist and went public on it. So I just wasn't happy about it at all. And not a lot's changed. But the Advocate, I must admit, I sent this to them within a week of the annual plan being adopted, and it took me to about a couple of weeks ago to get it published. So it took a long time, constantly getting on to the Advocate to get them to publish it. When this hit the press, I got in touch with the leader, or they got in touch with me, and they were interested in it as well. And I said, well, the Advocate's done a pretty good job on it, and they wanted to come to it from a different angle. They wanted to go to the council and get the council's view on it. Fine, find out why they won't publish this statement they want. So they went and spoke to the, and this was in last week's leader, most of you would have read it, one of the managing staff, and he said, yes, it's in there. All the figures you want are in there, you know, that engine sign reporting again. If it is, I can't find it, and I defy anyone sitting in this room to find it. It's not even called internal borrowing. I think they called it application of funding operations financial cost or something. Look, I don't want to believe that the majority of councillors are deliberately doing this, but I have to believe that. I've given them all the information and they won't do it, or otherwise they're being led through the nose by a very small team, which includes management and some very strong councillors, and I'm quite disappointed at the performance of that. And councillors got to say, look, it's their plan, it's the information document from councillors, and they can have in the plan what they like. Now you just talk about this financial thing, they've got certain standards to meet, and I accept that. There is nothing wrong with having things in the plan that you want to put in the plan. It's your plan. You know, if you want those single pay, it's the same as rates. You know, the only mention you get about rates is that we're going to increase rates by the rate of inflation. You know, most people like that say, oh yeah, 5% a year for 10 years, it's 50%. That's wrong. Because 5% goes on, 5% goes on, it's all compounded. Why not give some examples of an average residential property or a small business something? There's nothing wrong with it. There's only a few extra pages in the document, but they won't do it. You know? And I've got some real concerns about how the finances are being managed, but that's not my task. It was just mainly this. And to me it started with this $20 million for the Old Boys building, where they spent money they hadn't got. I mean, can you imagine your phone going, hello, you've got an old motorbike around the back there that's worth about $500. I'll give you $3,000 for it. Sold. So the next day you jump on a plane and go and spend a fortnight in Rarotonga, put it on your credit card. No one ever comes to buy your motorbike. Well, that's what council do with their $20. And again, when they spoke to the chairman of the Finance Committee, he was reported in the paper as saying that he may have used the word statutory, I can't remember, but he had an obligation to the ratepayers to put it into the plan. Engine sign information. That's true, but not in that form. It should have gone in my view, as a contingency. If we get $20 million, this is how we're going to spend it. Well, we didn't get the $20 million, but let's go and spend it anyway and raise another $20 million. Just unbelievable stuff to me, it really is. And what really bugs me, when you read council's own documentation, council, in carrying out its business, council is required to do a number of things. These include carrying out business in a clear, transparent and accountable manner, considering community views by offering clear information. This is council's documentation in the plan. And this is the best one. This is the one I love. I'm going to get it blown up and put it on my wall. The draft plan and its debt profile have been established after careful consideration by the council, which is mindful that the community is sensitive to public debt. They're just words. You know, it's just like saying to someone, I love you. Or I turn the lights down low and hold you by the hand, look in the eye, and speak from here.
It's not getting much better.
Speak and say, I love you. They're the same words, but there's an entirely different concept of what the meaning of them. And that's what you counsel. Now, I don't expect the council to hold my hand, look me in the eye and say, Bill, I love you. But I do expect them to be honest with the level of debt. And I'll be putting in a submission again next year asking for exactly the same thing. I don't like being treated, like all you guys are, as a mushroom.
That's right.
You've all seen the mushroom sign? All those funny little mushrooms, funny little eyes and ears. Keep me in the dark and feed me on bullshit. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much there, Bill. You're probably restricted under a confidentiality agreement, but I have a question to ask you. After that article appeared in the newspaper, were you visited by the CEO?
No, I wasn't.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions at the back there. We've also got 3 questions we need to read out from people that couldn't be here this evening, and we'll get those ready soon, but we've got a couple up the back here. We've got Ben Smith and Colin Edwards.
Thank you. I'm not sure about this internal borrowing. I wondered whether it's internal theft, actually. As I understand it, that 20 million came about by selling assets. And it goes into a property redevelopment fund. And it's been borrowed from that, but it's going to be paid back within 7 years with interest. I can't believe that 2 councils' time will be able to find that money. So I think what we've done is spend 20 million of assets to prop up the day-to-day spending, and that money will be never repaid. Am I being cynical or misunderstanding?
It's called misappropriation.
Well, I call it misuse of reserves. Remember, we were talking about taking money from water and wastewater charges for asset replacements. That's the normal example that we use. And that money, in a legal sense, has been taken for the purpose of asset replacements. But because it's not being put aside into sinking funds, like Alan was saying, it is so tempting to councillors and management to say, let's just grab that money in the meantime, we don't need it now, that we'll spend it on other stuff. And that's this misnomer of treasury management. Supposedly with NPV, net present value, and all of those nice financial planning ideas based on the fact that when the asset is due to be replaced, we'll find the money from somewhere. But if you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and if, as you say, councils change, if spending on the groceries is necessary to keep the show afloat, I'm not saying it is, all of those can be reasons why in the intervening years, when you come to get the money that you thought you'd reserved, because the reserve is still sitting on the reserve side of the balance sheet, you look in your investments, your cash, your near cash, your debenture stock, your equity, and it's not there because it's gone, as you've said. Now, this word internal borrowing is, as I say, an absolute no-no. It's not internal borrowing, it's misuse of reserve funds that have been taken for a legal purpose but have been used in the meantime for something different. In the expectation, you would hope that they'd find money from some sources to replace the assets. Well, hello, if you're up to your maximum debt level, one of the sources of funds is not going to be further borrowing. And so sometimes it can be further borrowing, in which case, you know, you're just compounding the problem further and furthermore. So the idea of sinking funds was a good one for the reason that it was locked up in a legal sense in a fund that would be available when you needed it for asset replacement.
My name's Andy Mears. I'm just asking about that value for money and clarifying that point. I'm sorry, I didn't switch it on. I read about that. On value for money, the request for that work to be done has to come from the council rather than from Audit New Zealand voluntarily doing it, if I'm not wrong. Aren't we in catch-22?
I stand to be corrected on this, but when I was working with the OAG, they chose, and I think they still do when I think about it, they chose the topics that were, let's say, of public interest, but they felt they had to investigate further. That is, you know, I mean, the whole thing would be asked about face, if you don't mind me saying so, if there were problems and you were waiting on the council that had created the problem to make the complaint that led to the investigation. So the auditors are free, as far as I'm aware still, to pick the subjects that they are going to investigate and report upon. And I mean, they do it all the time. You see the reports, there's probably a couple of audit reports every week that Parliament's sitting that are tabled on a variety of subjects. For example, did John Banks act correctly with his fundraising and the great .com? I mean, that's an example of something that they think is in the public interest. But there have been very few, and I can't find any in the last 2 or 3 years looking through the topics, which I did about a week or two ago, of Audit Office and OAG investigations of local government stuff that, you know, really were meaningful. For example, I could come up with a half a dozen real hard-hitting topics. They're not easy, but they're matters that I've raised in that policy paper that should be the subject of some audit work, investigation and reporting. For example, start with, quote, internal borrowing. That one seems to have got a fair bit of interest around the place, and it's certainly the one in terms of the misuse of reserve funds that would be top of my top 5 on the list of the things that they could get busy and do.
Hi Larry.
Hello Crichton, good to see you again. Yes. Still going around the taps, aren't we?
Yes, we are. And we used to hold your document up and say, oh, how good we were, but now we don't hold it up, we hide it. And the internal borrowing is a critical issue, and I think you're converting, speaking to the councillors here, with the B team, who is probably converted, but the A team is now watching rugby. So the question is, I want to know about internal borrowing. We have criteria when we have borrowing about amount of debt versus total income, the percentage like. Should we include internal borrowing into those formulas as well?
Well, that's
a part of a debt ratio.
Well, I'm glad you raised that, because I was going to say before that the auditors and the finance people will make damn sure on the face of the balance sheet that the external liabilities owing by the council to third parties is included in the liability side of the balance sheet. Don't get that wrong. I mean, part of the audit process is to ensure that those liabilities are correctly stated. But what we're saying in terms of this terrible thing, internal borrowing, is that below that level, so you've got the total of Whangarei District Council borrowing on the balance sheet, and that's audited, ticked off. That's the third-party liabilities. But internally, where these excess cash reserves have been lying around, what probably isn't accounted for, although you may have some treasury management ratios to manage that, and I don't know the detail of that, but at that internal level, the extent to which those funds that were intended for use, say, in 10 years' time, have in the meantime been used for other things, should be shown within some form of disclosure, either internally or within the accounts. And I think somebody was suggesting that, I think it was Bill, was it, that maybe there should be some disclosures on those sorts of internal transactions. But I wouldn't like you to go away thinking that the actual liabilities are misstated, because they won't be. But in terms of the misuse, if you like, of the funding that was intended for a replacement of assets, the extent to which that's fully accounted for is very much a question for the individual council to decide. And the Treasury management policies and the disclosures, I'm repeating myself, but it's worth repeating, the Treasury management policies and the disclosures of those transactions can be made reasonably clear. But there is no such thing as internal borrowing, because there is no, it's not a liability, there's no third party independent of the council to which they owe money. It's just use of the funds that they have internally within their own organisation.
Hello everybody, just get the distance right here, that's better. Thank you Larry for coming along. I just wanted to answer a question that Bill raised there, is about the transparency of our accounts. Our monthly accounts are now down to 2 pages. I can read 2 pages and I know exactly where the heartbeat is. But it's go to the long-term plan, which Bill is on about, and boy, it's a minefield. If I had to have 2 visits to our accountant and 1 to my doctor before I could find my way through it. And so it's taken 3 years to get the monthly accounts into a very simple slab, and taken another 3 years to get the long-term plan into a state that is readable to 90% of people. That's readable. So I just sort of thank Bill for raising that point. He makes a very good point.
Thank you, Brian. I'd just like to contrast that and thank you, really. That's good inside information, because if that's happening in Whangarei, big tick, because it didn't happen in Kaipara, and you can see the upshot of that. There were secret meetings, there were financial transactions that weren't approved. There's a whole raft of stuff that's going to come out in the woodwork, and I'm not suggesting, I haven't tonight, suggesting that Whangarei is acting inappropriately, any more so than other councils. And for example, the use of their reserve monies has had the audit tick. It doesn't actually help the people in Wellington that are looking for this money now to see whether we can dig ourselves out of the recession with local government's assistance. But that's exactly the policy issue that's being discussed at the moment, because if audit haven't been doing it, why haven't they been doing it? Should they be doing it? That's the direction that the discussion's taking.
Next one's Vivian.
During the 1990s, when New Zealand was substantially restructured and councils then had to contract out their services, and at the moment we have great calls for austerity and cost cutting, etc. Do you think it would be a good idea for council, the services that are now contracted out into the private sector, who have to then and therefore make a profit, be reabsorbed back into the council?
It's very much a horses for courses. Once again, I hate to keep beating up on Kaipara, but within the report of the review team, they made a specific point that Kaipara had taken that far too far, that the institutional knowledge inside the council from employees had disappeared and had been put into the hands largely of engineering consultants. Those engineering consultants came and went. They weren't subject to the same internal organisational controls that if they'd been an employee was. But this is almost like the tide going in, the tide going out, isn't it? Because at one point there was a move to contract everything out, and that happened. I think we'll see that some of that is brought back into the council. I personally think the answer is just much more effective and competent contract control. That is, you can't just leave it to an external agency or a consultant to represent the council's interests. The council's interests have to be represented by very competent professional, let's say, works managers. It doesn't mean that you have to have the people on the end of the shovel or behind a bulldozer wheel to run that whole works thing. But there's certainly an extreme that happened at Kaipara where the council lost control of that contracting process.
Yeah, hi, Frank Newman. A couple of quick comments, Larry. Firstly, the practice with respect to the Whangarei District Council is that when they do reach the debt limits, all they really do is change the limit rather than change the behaviour. So the other comment about the Whangarei District Council is that when you compare their long-term community plan, that is the 10-year plan, against what is actually achieved in the subsequent 10 years of that plan, there's actually almost no relationship between the two. In fact, when I've looked back, 9 out of the 10 years have actually seriously underperformed what they project. So in fact, we can't place any reliance whatsoever on what they project. I've got a question for you.
Can I just cover those first two things, Frank? The first one was, help me?
It was just a comment about that when they breach the debt limit.
Oh yes. Now, what we've had is the moving of the goalposts every time the debt limit is reached, right around the country. The original debt parameters set maybe 5 years ago have been blown out of the water. The second thing is, it is just a budget, the long-term plan, and they are required by law to report actual against plan on a regular basis, but that doesn't mean the two have to be the same.
Well, normally in business you...
They probably should. I mean, if it's a good plan, it should.
Well, that's why you do a budget, because you want to know exactly where you'll be in 1 year or 10 years' time, and there's no point in doing it if you don't actually want to get there. Just in terms of the question then, the bottom line really is that what effect is this debt going to have on our rates? You know, that's what we're all sitting here wanting to know, because you've put a red flag up here about the Whangarei District Council. I want to know, well, what effect is that going to have on my rates in the next 5 or 10 years? That's my question, and after that I've actually got an indication.
Frank, once again, let's talk budgets. If the council had a budget for somebody such as myself or a colleague or team of colleagues, we could do the math on the effect that you know, the debt servicing costs on a dollar-for-dollar basis has on, you know, people's rates, and that can be done. It's just arithmetic, really. But I will say this, that there is a correlation, and I've proved it on a number of occasions. It's pretty obvious anyway, that councils with high debt and high debt servicing costs, some as high as 20 cents in the rates dollar. Think about that. That just interest often, because there's very few debt repayment programs abroad at the moment. The debt servicing cost has become 20, sometimes more than 20% of the total operating expenditure. So the inference from that is that those interest costs and debt servicing costs do flow through into rates. In fact, I reckon it's probably the most responsive of the expenditures that actually end up on your rates. Yeah, I mean, high debt councils generally have high rates, so there's something of the proof.
Okay, and really my invitation is that we have 5 existing district councillors, sitting district councillors here tonight. And I'd like to invite any one of them actually to tell us that if they think the debt is justifiable at the current level, to explain why they think it is.
Just before you do that, I haven't made a great play of the fact that, I did say very briefly that the debt that's proposed, and the actual debt at the moment, which is one and the same thing on a per ratepayer basis, is not, repeat, not amongst the highest in the country. I'd have to go back and look at my numbers again. But it's high enough. It's probably as much as this district at the moment can sustain, in my humble opinion, because of the demographics. And that was one of the major reasons why I'm here tonight. That is, if the council is considering further borrowing or further expenditure away from, let's say, the core stuff, then here are the facts, the financial facts. And I did say at the beginning that it's for you to determine whether there's more debt borrowing capacity or not. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sort of take over the answers that the councillors may or may not want to come up with.
I'd like to make a comment on that. The councillor who's in charge of finance, and all due respect, Frank is not here this evening, and as he's the chairman of the finance committee, I think it would be good for these councillors to go back to the council and come back and perhaps publish something in the media so that we can all get an answer.
Well, with respect, Warren, all councillors are in charge of our finances. They shouldn't shirk from that responsibility. And if anyone here thinks that the current debt level is justifiable, they should say so now.
That's the comment. Yep. Who wants to have the first shot at it? Councillor Christie.
Too high, and I voted against it, and I'm only one of the annual who voted against the long-term plan.
Honestly, thanks, Ian. Yeah, honestly, look, I'm not comfortable with it personally. I can't claim to have voted against the long-term plan like Crichton, but we have to have a plan. You work to formulate it the best way you can, and what you come up with largely is what you come up with, and to a certain degree you have to live with it. But as far as the debt level goes, look, I continue to vote against unpopular and unnecessary projects that are pushing our debt up. And if everyone had voted like me, it would be $30 million down on what our debt figure is. So think about, so we need to think about that. There's some sacred cows in terms of projects that have been planned for a long time that people aren't willing to let go of. If we're willing to reassess those, we can bring that debt way down.
Interesting is, I'm here today, and Larry's here today, but who's not here today is Standards and Poor's. I think if we look to them, they said, they marked us on 5 points. 3 were good, but the most important ones, 2 were bad. One was high debt, the other was poor budgetary performance. And both go hand in hand. And that, in a short sentence, is where I stand on our financial position.
Yeah, thank you again. I didn't know that.
I think you have to look at debt, the overall financial position in its total picture, not just debt by itself. And I don't think you need to look at debt as an individual in the same way as you might look at, or a company in the same way as you might look at a local authority. The local authority has got a responsibility beyond just the length of our life, for instance. You've got to continue to have those assets over a long period of time. So, it's a total picture. At this stage, I'm comfortable with our debt level in terms of its financial prudence, in terms of the measures of our interest rate, our interest costs against total rates, and those sorts of measures. I'm reasonably comfortable where we're at the moment. Doesn't mean to say it can't be better, but I'm not uncomfortable with the picture that it looks like at the moment. Rate increases are budgeted for around about 3% per year over the 10-year plan, and an overall debt level at the end of those 10 years at about the same as it is at the moment. So when you look at the total picture, I'm not uncomfortable with where we're at.
Yeah, very well said, because the policy that's being developed at the moment by people in the financial circles of the DIA are to set up some benchmarks, financial benchmarks, and included in those will be a high, medium and low ratio, let's say, because it will be a financial ratio. For example, the proportion of debt interest to total rates revenue, so that it won't be long within the next 2 or 3 years where ratepayer groups like this will become familiar with what is seen as an acceptable, let's say, middle point of that ratio. And so councils will be accountable, hopefully, around those benchmarks, and you can determine, hopefully, because they will be, not hopefully, they will be disclosed in public accounts in a table form, so that you see that the high is a certain figure, the medium percentage of, let's say, debt interest to rates revenue is the middle point, and there's a low point. Ours is this, it was this last year, this is what we plan for it to be in the next year. Now that's accountability, isn't it? You can't get much better than that. It's coming. And I think there are many councils, particularly at the internal level, which is probably what the councils are seeing, can say they're comfortable with debt at this certain level, but by hokey they'll be pretty careful that if it goes above that, to start dealing with the ratepayer groups, to talk to the media, to be involved in discussions about what is an appropriate maximum level of debt based on those ratios. They have been there in the past, but we've just said, for example, and Frank has pointed out the fact that they keep changing on us. You know, the maximum debt levels keep shifting. And you can see from the debt graphs that I've come up with that the increase in debt has been inexorable, hasn't it? There hasn't been a debt repayment program for a long time. Well, hello, the world's changed. We're in a recession now. The global financial crisis is affecting us all, and it's not just a matter of the same old, same old. So those ratios, when they come in, will be very vital for us to see. Maybe not a maximum debt level, but let's see if we can get down to a minimum one. Remember, $1,500 per ratepayer was the maximum prudent debt level for planning purposes. Now, I was just thinking before the meeting that you could probably use a multiplier over the last 14 years or so of about 2.5 on that 1,500 for today's dollars. So it's going to be around about the 4,000, 4,500 mark, which is where Whangarei's is. So thank you for that. And I mean, I think that brings some of the balance back to this meeting, because I didn't want you people going away to say that with the feeling that there's a calamity just around the corner. But the message really, particularly based on the plans of the council at the moment, is be careful out there.
Right, we've got the last question here from Jeremy, and then we'll get on to the absentee questions. Thank you.
My name is Jeremy Busk. I'm one of the 5 that sit in the back row at the council meetings, and Robin Weepering calls us agitators.
Oh, Robin, he's still around, is he?
And Pat Slater says you can't have clean washing unless you've got agitators. One of my questions is about this international reporting system. As I understand it, was developed more for international businesses. And so my first question is, why in the hell is a local government like Whangarei District Council spending all the ratepayers' money on having this fancy accounting system when it's really designed for people that are in the export business and trying to keep their accounting to suit international markets? That's question 1.
I'll answer that if I may, yeah. I stand corrected again on this, but the departing Auditor General, a bloke by the name of Kevin Brady, in his last 2 or 3 months in the job, basically canned IFRS for public sector reporting. So what we're getting at the moment, I haven't followed the whole detail of it, but it is certainly a hell of a lot less than would be required if we had the full 9 yards of those standards. But it is still far too complicated, and I know that there's a project underway for further simplification, major simplifications of council external reporting.
Thank you. My second question is the relationship between the CEO, the bureaucrat and the politician, and here we have a merging, and I think that's personally wrong, and I think that because I'm invested in many public companies, and I think that there's a board of directors and there's a management team. The management team reports to the board of directors. The board of directors, in this case the Whangarei District Council, which is a multi-million-dollar enterprise, sets a budget. The CEO should go away and make sure that budget's adhered to, and if the councillors decide to play around with the budget, the CEO should say, you employed me to run the council to the budget, and if you want to change the budget, do it in the next draft annual plan or the next long-term plan. Is that the way we should run things, or am I wrong?
Sounds pretty good to me. The paragraphs on governance in the review team report at Kaipara are absolutely spot on the money. I suggest that every elected member gets to have a read of that, because it's almost the opposite of what you suggested, to the point that, and I don't know how far this will go, but the team has suggested that the affairs of Kaipara, and for that matter it could relate to many other councils, that those affairs are monitored by a Crown appointee. So that the central government are that concerned about what's going on, perhaps distrustful of council management in particular, and the governance structure, less particular, that they've said we're going to have a Crown appointee to ride herd on what happens at Kaipara. Now that means that we've got to look, I think, again at the position of the CEO as the sole employer. This was a reaction, of course, to the opposite situation 10 years ago when councillors were meddling in the detail of council business. Now we seem that the pendulum has swung to the other end, where they don't even get a look in because of something of what's in the Advocate article that I've pointed you toward today. And it's a human relationship problem, but the legislation at the moment, and I don't want to be quoted on this, but it possibly gives too much power to one, generally man.
All right, we've got 3 questions that we'll get up. Larry, would you like to bring it up on the screen? There's 3 people that are away, and the first question is from Colin Davis, and he says, you may like to ask this anonymously. I didn't think it was necessary, because no one knows Colin Davis, do they? No. And the question that he asked was, if the design life of sealed roads is 25 to 30 years,
and the budget to rehabilitate those roads at the end of their design life is not sufficient, which then pushes the projected life of the roads out for further than design, this would constitute a liability on the books, would it not?
Answer, it would not.
And if so, why is it not showing, and why has the auditor not tagged the accounts with such liability?
Not applicable.
If you count the kilometres of sealed roads and the budget for rebuilds, it would suggest imminent collapse due to insufficient funding, or if it is devaluing of an asset, would reach insolvency or may have passed it already.
Well, I'd just like to say that insufficient funding is what we've been talking to tonight. No, I should have a bit of a chat to Colin and do some double entry T accounts like we used to in the old accounting days, because there's a bit of a mixture in that question. It's a difficult question to address, but certainly if this insufficient funding arises from the internal borrowing and the shenanigans that have been going on, then that's possibly what he's driving at.
Okay, second question, which is from Charlie, and he's a ratepayer from Whangarei. And he asks, Larry, we hear a great deal about a policy of internal borrowing by our council. Is this a rational and optimal way of managing council funds? Please explain in simple terms, if possible, because it is all very confusing to a layman or woman.
Well, I think we've covered that, haven't we? Yeah, that good.
Okay, right. Okay. I said I'd read them out. The third question is from a staff member of council from Kensington. What was his name? It says, Larry, I understand that the WDC declined over this in the past 3 years. You were offered to present to the elected members and management your vital stats analysis, which we have just been treated to. Why do you think this happened, and does this attitude, in your view, have any relationship to your firm's league table and the coverage given to council affairs by the Northern Advocate?
Well, I guess I would say this. I'd firstly like to declare an interest in the answer to this question, because I do market my products. And I've got to say that, if anything, I have been an abject failure on the basis that the marketing in the last year has been just barely enough to keep a fly alive. Now, either that's indicating that the stuff that I'm producing is absolute CRAP, which I don't believe it is, because there's no other comparative type performance measurement around. So it's a bit of a default. Or councils are genuinely, perhaps not genuine is the right word, but they are disinterested in the stuff that I've got. I would have thought that that's the sort of vital information that councillors need to get at least once every 2 or 3 years anyway, for having a basis of understanding what the dynamics of each of the district is. And the 10 biggies, for example, covers the relative rates levels, the debt levels, the mix of operating and expenditure, the proportion of rates that's taken as a proportion of the total revenue, the mini GDP. So there's a lot of gold in there. Perhaps it's my marketing that's at fault, because I would hope that in the next few years that many of the councils will take these reports, or a better product, but certainly to take a much more heightened interest in improving their performance, as I've already mentioned.
Okay, rightio. So what we're going to do now is probably go away tonight and think about where to from here. So if people have any ideas, I think it's pretty important to sort of voice those ideas through the media. Letters to the editor usually get some good responses, and it's to keep the issue alive. If people aren't happy about certain things, it's to keep it alive. So that comes us to the end tonight. So there's a few things I want to say thanks. I want to firstly thank the volunteers that have helped out. And I'm just going to run through the names, just the Christian names. There's Steve, and Dean, and Vivian, and Alan, and Colin, and Wayne, and Pat. That's my wife. She's done quite a bit to help. Owen, Jeremy, Lorraine and Brian, and Claire and Jim. So thanks to all those.
And a big thank you, of course, to Warren. Let's give him a big hand.
I'd like to thank the media, they were all invited and sent invitations, and I know some of them have followed up with interviews with Larry. We've got Radio New Zealand here this evening, thank you very much. The Advocate, they put an article in the paper the other day and supported the meeting, get people along, and also to the Whangarei leader, so special thanks to them. But I think the most important thing, we've got two more people to thank. The first one, and I really want everyone to give a good round of applause to all you people for coming out tonight to listen. Very, very important that you came out. But a special thanks to Larry. Larry normally charges councils a fee to come up. The councils up here didn't want him, and he said to us, I'll come up, I'll give my time. He's staying at, what's that top hotel? and he's come up here. If you haven't already given to the Alcohar collection tonight, please do so. And I'd love a big round of applause to Larry, and thank you very much, Larry. Thanks again to everyone for coming. There's tea and coffee and refreshments in there over there, some cold juice. Thanks again, and please drive safely home. Thank you very much.
Thank you.